Rain hammered the cracked pavement as Emma clutched her scholarship folder tight against her chest, her worn canvas shoes splashing through puddles. The clock on her wrist screamed 10 minutes. 10 minutes until everything changed. Ahead, a white Mercedes sat silent, its front tire deflated and useless. An older woman in a cream coat knelt beside it, silver hair dampening in the storm, her hands shaking as she tried to grip the wrench. People passed. Cars swerved around her. No one stopped. Emma's heart pounded. If she helped, she'd miss the only bus, miss the interview, miss her shot at a different life. But the woman's eyes, tired, desperate, alone, made her chest ache. She set the folder down on the wet curb, dropped to her knees beside the tire, and whispered, "Let me help you." When she looked up, the bus was already pulling away. Emma exhaled slowly. She'd just lost her dream without knowing the old woman was a billionaire. Before you find out what really happens next, take a guess. Did this girl just make the biggest mistake of her life? Or the best decision? Emma lived with her mother Martha in a narrow room tucked behind the garage of a sprawling estate. The walls were stained yellow with age, the single window barely wide enough to let in morning light. But that room always held laughter. It smelled like soap and worn cotton, like hope stretched thin but never broken. Martha had been a housekeeper for the Roberts family for over a decade. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed polished silverware, until it mirrored the ceiling folded linens with the kind of care most people reserved for love letters. She never complained. Not when her knees ached. Not when Mrs. Roberts spoke to her like she was invisible. Not even when the other staff whispered that she and her daughter didn't belong. Emma grew up surrounded by the hum of vacuum cleaners, the sharp scent of bleach, and the distant dream of white buildings she could only glimpse through iron gates. She studied under a borrowed desk lamp, powered by an extension cord from the garage. Her textbooks were secondhand, spines cracked and pages dog-eared by previous owners, but she treated them like treasures. She was always top of her class. Always. Teachers noticed. They said she had something rare, a hunger to learn that couldn't be taught. But hunger didn't pay tuition. It didn't open doors to schools like St. Mary's Academy, where the children of doctors and lawyers sat in sunlit classrooms and talked about futures that felt guaranteed. St. Mary's offered one thing that changed everything: a merit scholarship. Full ride. No tuition, no fees, just one requirement: survive the interview. Only the most exceptional students were chosen. This morning was Emma's shot. Martha had ironed Emma's blouse 3 times the night before, pressing out every wrinkle with the kind of focus she used on Mrs. Roberts' silk scarves. She'd woken up early to braid Emma's hair, her rough hands surprisingly gentle as they wove the strands tight and neat. "Remember, baby," Martha said, her voice low and steady. "No matter what they ask you, just be yourself. You don't need to pretend you're someone you're not. You don't need to act rich or polished. They need to see your heart." Emma smiled, wrapping her arms around her mother's waist. "Mama, I'm going to make you proud. You already do every single day." On the small wooden table between them sat the scholarship application, folded and unfolded so many times, the creases had worn soft. The edges were frayed, but the handwriting was still clear, still confident. Emma had written about resilience, about watching her mother serve others with dignity, about wanting to prove that your starting point didn't dictate your ending. Outside, rain began to tap against the tin roof, soft at first, then louder. Martha glanced toward the window, her expression tightening for just a moment. She didn't say what she was thinking, that the world wasn't always kind to people like them. That hard work didn't always mean fairness. That sometimes, no matter how much you deserved something, the door stayed closed. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she kissed Emma's forehead and whispered, "Go show them who you are." Emma grabbed her folder, checked the clock, and stepped out into the rain. The cold hit her immediately, soaking through her thin jacket, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't afford to. Behind her, Martha stood at the window, watching her daughter's small figure disappear down the street. Pride swelled in her chest, but so did fear. She'd spent years teaching Emma to be kind, to work hard, to believe that goodness mattered. But deep down she worried the world would teach her daughter something different, something cruel. Martha pressed her palm against the foggy glass and prayed quietly. Not for wealth. Not for an easy life. just for her daughter to be seen. Really seen. For someone somewhere to recognize what she already knew, that Emma was extraordinary. The rain fell harder now, drumming a steady rhythm against the roof. Inside the tiny room, the desk lamp flickered, once then held. The scholarship letter sat where Emma had left it, ink slightly smudged from being held too tightly. But the name at the top was still legible: Emma Turner. Outside, the world moved on, indifferent and cold. But inside that small room, a mother stood watch, believing with everything she had that today might be the day everything changed. She didn't know how right she was. She just didn't know it would happen in a way neither of them could have imagined. The rain came down heavier with every step. Emma's shoes squelched against the pavement water, seeping through the thin canvas and soaking her socks. She gripped the scholarship folder tighter, trying to shield it from the downpour, but the edges were already starting to curl and dampen. The bus stop was just ahead. 2 more blocks. She could see the covered shelter, could almost hear the rumble of the engine that would carry her across town to St. Mary's. Her heart pounded in rhythm with her footsteps. 9:45, 15 minutes to spare. She could make it. She had to make it. Then she heard it, a sharp pop like a gunshot cutting through the rain. She flinched, turning toward the sound. A white Mercedes sat motionless in the middle of the road, hazard lights blinking weakly through the storm. Smoke curled from beneath the front wheel well. The front tire sagged, completely flat rubber peeling away from the rim. A woman stood beside it, maybe in her mid-50s, tall but slightly hunched against the wind. She wore a cream-colored coat that was already soaked through her silver hair, plastered to her face. In her hands, she held a tire iron, but her grip was unsteady, her fingers trembling as she tried to fit it over the lug nuts. Cars swerved around her. Horns blared. A man in a suit glanced over, shook his head, and kept walking, his umbrella tilted forward like a shield. A woman with a stroller crossed to the other side of the street, pulling her child closer as if trouble were contagious. No one stopped. Emma's chest tightened. She looked at the woman, then at her watch. 9:46. The bus would arrive in 4 minutes. If she helped, there was no way she'd make it. The next bus wouldn't come for another hour. By then, the interview would be over. Her one shot gone. She took a step toward the bus stop, then another. Her mind raced, calculating, justifying. Someone else will help her. Someone with a car. Someone who isn't risking everything. But when she glanced back, the woman stumbled, her knee buckling as she tried to crouch down. She caught herself on the car door, breathing hard, her face pale and strained. Emma stopped. Her pulse hammered in her ears, louder than the rain, louder than the voice in her head screaming at her to keep moving. She looked at the bus stop one more time, then she turned around and ran. "Ma'am." Emma's voice barely cut through the storm as she reached the car. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were a soft gray, tired but kind. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little dizzy. You don't need to. Let me help." Emma knelt beside the tire, setting her folder on the wet ground. Water immediately began seeping into the pages, but she didn't look at it. She couldn't. The woman stared at her, confused. "Don't you have somewhere to be? You look like you're in a hurry." Emma swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I was. But I can't just leave you here." For a moment, the woman didn't move. Then slowly she nodded and handed Emma the tire iron. "You're a good kid." Emma worked quickly, her hands slipping on the cold metal rain streaming down her face and into her eyes. The lug nuts were rusted and stubborn, fighting her with every turn. Her fingers ached. Her arms burned. But she kept going, jaw clenched, refusing to stop. Behind her, she heard the low growl of an engine. The bus. She didn't turn around. She couldn't bear to watch it pass. The woman crouched beside her, holding the jack steady. "What's your name, Emma?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm Margaret." The woman paused, watching Emma struggle with the last nut. "Emma, why are you doing this?" Emma finally looked up, rain dripping from her chin. "Because nobody else did." Margaret's expression softened, something flickering in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or memory. She reached out and placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "You're going to be late, aren't you?" Emma nodded. Blinking back tears she refused to let fall. "Yeah. I had a scholarship interview." It was supposed to change everything. Margaret's breath caught, but she said nothing. The final lug nut came loose. Together, they lifted the spare tire into place, tightening it as best they could. When it was done, Emma sat back on her heels, chest heaving, her clothes soaked through and streaked with grease and mud. Margaret stood slowly, pulling a wallet from her coat pocket. She took out several bills and tried to press them into Emma's hand. "Please, let me—" "No." Emma shook her head, her voice firm despite the tremor in it. "I didn't do it for money. I just did what anyone should do." Margaret stared at her, something unreadable crossing her face. Not everyone would have Emma. Not everyone does. Emma picked up her scholarship folder. The pages were soaked ink bleeding across her carefully written essay. Her hands shook as she held it. All that work. All that hope. Ruined. She looked down the street. The bus was long gone, just a fading red blur disappearing into the rain. Margaret watched her, silent, her eyes glistening. "I'm so sorry." Emma forced a smile, though it felt like breaking. "It's okay. I made my choice." She turned and started walking, her steps slow and heavy, water pooling in her shoes. Behind her, Margaret stood beside the car, watching until Emma disappeared around the corner. In the distance, the rain began to soften, but the ache in Emma's chest only grew heavier. She'd done the right thing. She knew she had. So why did it feel like she'd just lost everything? What Emma didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that Margaret was still standing there, staring after her with a look of quiet determination. And in her other hand, hidden in her coat pocket, was a business card embossed with gold lettering: Margaret Anderson, founder and CEO, Anderson Holdings. The Roberts estate was in chaos the next morning. Mrs. Roberts paced the marble foyer, her heels clicking sharply with each turn, snapping orders at every staff member who passed. "Make sure the flowers are fresh. Check the silverware again. I want everything perfect." Martha moved quietly through the kitchen, arranging pastries on crystal platters, while Emma helped polish wine glasses until they sparkled. Neither of them spoke much. Emma's eyes were still red from crying herself to sleep the night before, her ruined scholarship folder hidden under her bed like evidence of a crime. "Today is very important," Mrs. Roberts announced to the gathered staff, her voice tight with nervous energy. "Mrs. Anderson is coming to tour the estate. She's the founder of Anderson Holdings, one of the wealthiest women in the country. Do not embarrass me." Emma's hand stilled on the glass she was holding. Anderson. The name meant nothing to her, but the way Mrs. Roberts said it with reverence and fear made her stomach tighten. At exactly 10 o'clock, the iron gates swung open. A convoy of black cars rolled up the circular driveway, their polished surfaces reflecting the morning sun. Security personnel stepped out first, scanning the grounds with practiced efficiency. Then a rear door opened. Margaret Anderson emerged. Emma's breath stopped. The glass slipped from her fingers, catching on the edge of the counter before Martha grabbed it. Time seemed to fracture, each second stretching impossibly long, as the woman from yesterday, the woman with the flat tire, the trembling hands, the grateful smile, stepped into the foyer wearing an impeccably tailored white suit. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But it was her. Same silver hair, now styled elegantly. Same gray eyes, now sharp and assessing as they swept the room. Same gentle expression that softened when her gaze landed on Emma. "Good morning, Mrs. Roberts," Margaret said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades commanding boardrooms. "Thank you for having me." Mrs. Roberts practically bowed. "The honor is ours, Mrs. Anderson. Please let me introduce our staff." "Who is that girl?" Margaret's voice cut through the introduction, her eyes still fixed on Emma. Mrs. Roberts barely glanced over. "Oh, that's just Martha's daughter. One of our housekeeper's children. She helps out sometimes." "Just?" Margaret's eyebrow arched slightly, a hint of steel entering her tone. Emma stood, frozen tea towel clutched in her hands, unable to move or speak. Her mother's hand found her shoulder, squeezing gently. The estate tour began. Emma tried to fade into the background, but she felt Margaret's eyes on her throughout the morning. During the inspection of the dining room, when Emma carefully set down a tray of refreshments, their eyes met for a brief electric moment. Margaret said nothing, but Emma saw recognition there, and something else. Something that looked almost like pride. Then it happened. One of the younger maids, a girl named Cassandra, who'd always resented Emma's quiet competence, deliberately knocked a pitcher of ice water as Emma passed. The cold liquid splashed across the floor, droplets hitting Emma's worn shoes. "Clean it up," Cassandra hissed loud enough for others to hear. "That's what you're good for, isn't it?" Emma knelt, immediately reaching for a cloth, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She could feel everyone watching, Mrs. Roberts looking annoyed at the disruption, the other staff members averting their eyes, and Margaret Anderson standing perfectly still, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched. Then Margaret spoke, her voice quiet, but carrying through the room like a bell. "That's enough." Everyone froze. Mrs. Roberts turned confused. "Mrs. Anderson." Margaret walked forward slowly, deliberately, until she stood beside Emma. "Stand up, dear." Emma rose shakily, clutching the wet cloth, her face hot with shame and confusion. Margaret addressed the room, her gaze sweeping across every face. "I'd like to speak with Martha and her daughter. Privately." The color drained from Mrs. Roberts' face. "Of course, if there's been some problem." "There hasn't been a problem," Margaret said calmly. "Yet." The staff dispersed quickly, whispers following them like smoke. Martha and Emma were led to the library, a room Emma had only ever seen while dusting its shelves. Now she sat on a leather chair that probably cost more than everything she owned, her mother beside her, both of them terrified and bewildered. Margaret closed the door. The sound of it clicking shut felt final, like the end of something. She turned to face them, and for a long moment she just looked at Emma. "Yesterday," Margaret began, her voice soft now, almost tender, "you helped me. Do you remember?" Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper. "You're the woman with the flat tire." "I am." Margaret smiled, but there was something sad in it, something distant and remembering. "You stopped to help me when no one else would. You missed your scholarship interview at St. Mary's Academy. You ruined your application folder trying to change a tire in the rain. And when I tried to pay you, you refused." Martha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Emma, you didn't tell me." "I couldn't, Mama." Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. "I couldn't tell you I'd thrown it all away." "You didn't throw anything away," Margaret said firmly. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a red envelope, its edges crisp and clean. 40 years ago, I was a housekeeper, just like your mother. I was poor, exhausted, and convinced my life would never change. Then one rainy night, a stranger helped me when my car broke down. That stranger gave me a chance, my first real chance, and it changed everything." She held the envelope out to Emma, who stared at it like it might disappear if she blinked. "When I saw you yesterday, soaking wet, sacrificing your future to help someone you didn't know, I saw myself." Margaret's voice cracked slightly. "I came here today to announce a new scholarship program. And you, Emma Turner, are going to be the very first recipient." The envelope trembled in Margaret's hand. Inside it was a formal letter embossed with the seal of Anderson Holdings, offering full tuition, housing, and expenses for St. Mary's Academy. Emma couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her mother sobbed beside her, pulling her close. "You didn't help me to get something in return," Margaret continued, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That's exactly why you deserve this more than anyone." Emma dropped to her knees, the red envelope falling from her trembling hands. She reached for Margaret's fingers, gripping them tightly, her voice breaking. "Mrs. Anderson, I didn't help you for this. I didn't help you for anything." Margaret knelt down beside her, ignoring the expensive fabric of her suit pressing against the floor. She placed both hands on Emma's shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. "That's exactly why you're worthy, sweetheart. That's exactly why." The room fell silent except for Martha's quiet sobbing. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with the weight of years of scrubbing floors, years of swallowing pride, years of wondering if goodness really mattered in a world that seemed to reward only power and wealth. Margaret stood slowly, helping Emma to her feet. She turned to address the staff members who'd begun gathering at the doorway, drawn by the sound of crying. Mrs. Roberts stood among them, her face pale, her expression caught somewhere between shock and shame. "I want everyone to hear this," Margaret said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built an empire from nothing. This young woman sacrificed her future to help a stranger. She didn't know who I was. She didn't expect anything in return. She just saw someone who needed help, and she stopped. She picked up the envelope from where it had fallen and held it up for everyone to see. This scholarship isn't charity. It's recognition. It's a promise that kindness will never go unseen, not in my world. Mrs. Roberts stepped forward, her voice unsteady. Mrs. Anderson, I apologize for how I've treated them. I should have— Don't apologize to me. Margaret interrupted, her tone sharp but not unkind. Apologize to them. Better yet, change how you see people. Every person who works for you has a story, has dignity, has worth. Start treating them that way. Mrs. Roberts nodded, tears beginning to form in her own eyes. She looked at Martha, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in 10 years. I'm sorry, I've been blind. Martha wiped her face with the back of her hand and nodded silently, too overcome to speak. Margaret turned back to Emma, her expression softening. Come here, dear. Emma moved forward and Margaret pulled her into an embrace. It was the kind of hug that felt like safety, like validation, like someone finally seeing you for who you truly are. Emma buried her face in Margaret's shoulder and let herself cry. Not tears of sadness anymore, but of relief, of disbelief, of hope that had been buried so long it hurt coming back to life. Your mother raised you right, Margaret whispered into her hair. She taught you something schools can't teach. She taught you humanity. When they finally pulled apart, Margaret handed Emma the envelope again, this time, placing it firmly in her hands and closing Emma's fingers around it. Open it. With shaking hands, Emma unsealed the envelope. Inside was a letter on heavy cream paper, the words printed in elegant script: St. Mary's Academy, full merit scholarship recipient, Emma Marie Turner. Tuition, housing, books, and living expenses. Fully funded, effective. Immediately Emma read it once, twice, 3 times, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less miraculous. Her mother read over her shoulder, her breath catching with each line. It's real, baby, Martha whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It's real. Margaret smiled, watching them. The interview you missed yesterday doesn't matter anymore. You already passed the only test that counts. You showed who you are when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain. That's character, Emma. That's the rarest thing in the world. She paused, letting her words settle. There's a saying I've lived by since that rainy night 40 years ago when someone showed me kindness. I want you to remember it. Kindness is the truest form of intelligence. The words hung in the air, simple but profound. Emma felt them sink into her chest, taking root somewhere deep. Martha pulled Emma close, holding her daughter's face in her work-worn hands. You see now, baby. You see what I've been trying to teach you your whole life. Doing the right thing doesn't make you lose. It might come late, but it always comes back. Always. Emma nodded, unable to speak, tears streaming freely down her face. She looked at her mother, this woman who'd sacrificed everything, who'd taught her that dignity wasn't about what you owned, but how you treated others, and saw her own strength reflected back. Margaret cleared her throat, drawing their attention. There's one more thing. The scholarship begins Monday. That gives you this weekend to prepare. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to Martha. This is my personal assistant's number. Call her tomorrow. We'll arrange for Emma's school supplies, uniforms, everything she needs. Martha stared at the card, overwhelmed. Mrs. Anderson? I don't know how to thank you. Thank me by letting your daughter shine, Margaret replied simply. And Emma? She looked at the girl whose tear-stained face was now glowing with cautious joy. When you become successful, and you will remember this moment. Remember what it felt like to be seen. Then make sure you see others. Emma nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of that promise. I will. I promise, I will. Margaret smiled, and for a moment she looked younger, lighter, as if passing this gift forward had lifted something heavy she'd been carrying for decades. Good. Because the world needs more people like you. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, sending golden light streaming through the library windows. It illuminated the 3 women standing together, a billionaire, a housekeeper, and a 14-year-old girl, connected not by circumstance, but by the belief that goodness matters. That kindness is never wasted. That sometimes the smallest acts create the biggest changes. 1 week later, Emma stood at the iron gates of St. Mary's Academy, wearing a crisp navy uniform that still smelled new. The blazer fit perfectly, the white collar starched and bright against her skin. Her shoes, real leather ones that didn't let in water, felt strange on her feet, almost too nice to be real. She took a deep breath and walked through the gates. Students moved past her in clusters, their conversations filled with talk of summer vacations in Europe and new cars for 16th birthdays. Some glanced at her curiously. Others smiled, sensing something different about the quiet girl with the scholarship pin on her lapel. But Emma kept her head high, her mother's words echoing in her mind. Be yourself. That's all you need to be. By lunchtime, whispers had spread. That's the girl Mrs. Anderson personally sponsored. I heard she helped her on the street. Apparently, she gave up her interview to change a tire. Emma sat alone, at first opening the lunch her mother had packed, simple sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Then a girl with kind eyes and auburn hair slid into the seat across from her. I'm Sophie. You're Emma, right? The scholarship student everyone's talking about. Emma nodded cautiously. Yeah, that's me. Sophie grinned. That's incredible. Most of us are here because our parents paid. You're here because you earned it. She leaned closer, her voice sincere. That's actually impressive. For the first time since walking through those gates, Emma smiled. Really smiled. That afternoon, Emma sat in the library and wrote a letter on school stationery, her handwriting careful and deliberate. Dear Mrs. Anderson, you taught me that kindness never loses its way. Maybe I wasn't born into silk and comfort, but I will live with a gentle heart. I promise that one day when I'm strong enough, I'll help someone else the way you helped me. I'll pass it forward. That's my vow to you. With gratitude and respect, Emma Turner. She sealed the envelope and mailed it that evening. 3 days later, Margaret received it at her office downtown. She sat by the window overlooking the city, reading Emma's words twice, then a third time. Her assistant noticed the tears in her eyes. Are you all right, Mrs. Anderson? Margaret smiled, folding the letter carefully. I'm perfect. This is why we do what we do. She whispered to herself, remembering a girl in the rain with dirty hands and a pure heart. The seed of kindness has been planted again. Back at the Roberts estate, something had shifted. Martha still cleaned, still worked long hours, but the way people spoke to her had changed. Mrs. Roberts no longer barked orders. She asked. She thanked. She even invited Martha to sit down for tea one afternoon, something that had never happened in 10 years. I've been thinking, Mrs. Roberts said quietly, stirring her cup. I'd like you to help train the new staff. Teach them what you know, not just about cleaning, but about service. Real service, the kind that comes from the heart. Martha nodded, surprised but graceful. I'd be honored. The younger maids, including Cassandra, started watching Martha differently. They noticed how she worked with dignity, how she never cut corners, how she treated every task like it mattered. Slowly, grudgingly, respect replaced resentment. Late one Thursday afternoon, Emma rode her bicycle down the old street where everything had changed. The rain was long gone now, replaced by golden autumn light that painted the pavement warm and soft. A white Mercedes was parked along the curb. The back window rolled down, and Margaret's face appeared smiling. Hello, Scholar. Emma laughed, braking beside the car. Hello, Mrs. Anderson. Margaret's eyes sparkled with affection. How's school? Hard. Wonderful. Everything I hoped it would be. Emma paused, her voice growing quieter. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you, Margaret replied, for reminding me why I do this work. The afternoon sun caught in Emma's hair, turning it gold at the edges. She looked different now, not just in the uniform, but in her posture, in the light in her eyes. She looked like someone who'd found her place in the world. Margaret watched her right away, pedaling toward a future that was finally wide open. And in that moment she felt what she always felt when she passed kindness forward: peace. Deep, unshakable peace. Because some gifts aren't measured in money. They're measured in lives changed in hope, restored in cycles broken and rebuilt with gentler hands. The voice slows, warm and reflective. Sometimes life forces us to choose between opportunity and kindness, between what we want and what's right. Emma lost her interview that rainy morning, but she found something far more valuable: proof that goodness is never invisible. We live in a world that measures success in titles and bank accounts, in degrees and corner offices. But maybe the truest measure is simpler. Maybe it's found in the moments when nobody's watching, when there's nothing to gain, when helping costs you something real. Emma could have kept walking. Most people did. She could have told herself that someone else would stop, that her dream mattered more, that one person couldn't make a difference. But she didn't. She saw someone who needed help, and she chose compassion over convenience. That choice changed everything. Not because Margaret Anderson was wealthy, not because there was a reward waiting, but because kindness creates ripples we can't always see. It opens doors we didn't know existed. It reminds us that we're all connected by our humanity. So if you've ever chosen to help someone even when it cost you something, don't regret it. Maybe today you lost an opportunity, but tomorrow, life has a way of returning what you gave. Not always in the form you expect, not always when you need it most, but always, always when it matters. Because in the end, the most intelligent thing we can do isn't about being clever or strategic. It's about being kind. It's about stopping in the rain. It's about seeing people really seeing them and choosing to care. That's the lesson Emma learned. That's the legacy Margaret passed forward. And that's the truth that changes everything. Kindness is never wasted. It just takes a different path home. Thank you for spending this time with me and letting this story into your heart. I'm really curious, where are you listening from right now, and what time is it where you are? Drop a comment below. I read every single one, and I love knowing we're connected across different cities, maybe even different countries, all sharing this moment together. If this story touched you, please subscribe to Maid's Daughter Stories. This is where small acts of courage light up big worlds, where ordinary people do extraordinary things, and where we remember that kindness always finds its way back. Hit that subscribe button and join our community. More stories are coming, and I can't wait to share them with you.